consequences. That's what he said. So that's the first important development. The second important development is that the EFF has written to the Speaker of Parliament, and what they want is for the withdrawal of this fiscal framework report. And they've mentioned a number of things that they're concerned about. So I've invited them to come and explain that to us, what they're concerned about. I know some of you have said, we still don't understand this proposal that Action SA has put forward, this recommendation. So I'll get Action SA to come and explain that recommendation as well. I'll get the DA as well. So we'll have all these different parties to give us their sense of what happened yesterday, their assessment, and what does that actually mean for the budget and the sitting later today. So let's start this conversation with Sinao Tambo, who is the Member of Parliament for the Economic Freedom Fighter. Sinao, thank you for making time. Good morning.
Morning, Clement. Morning to the listeners.
So you've written to the Speaker asking for the withdrawal of that report. What are you concerned about?
Look, I'm a member of the Standing Committee on Finance, so I was present yesterday when the fiscal framework and revenue proposals, as well as the committee report, were tabled to the Standing Committee on Finance for purposes of either acceptance or amendment. Now, our concern is that procedurally, the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Other Related Matters Act stipulates that we must first and foremost make a clear statement as to whether we are going to accept or amend the proposed fiscal framework and revenue proposals. Before then, we proceed to interact with the committee report and also to enact amendments to that. So procedurally, this was not done, as much as we tried to impress on the committee chairperson that this is what is required of us by law. Then we proceeded to make amendments to a committee report without having made that clear statement as to whether we're going to review or amend or accept the fiscal framework or revenue proposals. Now, this was a constant debate within the committee. Ultimately, the proposition was made whether we accept the committee report. Now, the committee report and the fiscal framework and revenue proposal are two separate things. So the proposition which was made is whether we adopt the report which reflects on submissions from stakeholders, interactions with National Treasury, the Minister and SARS, and other institutions. But the proposition as to whether we as a committee accept the revenue proposals and fiscal framework as it is was not made. Only later in the evening, we receive a final draft of the committee report which makes this clear statement, whereas as members of the committee, we were not allowed to deliberate on whether we accept or amend the fiscal framework and revenue proposals in committee. So it was made in hindsight, in retrospect, without us having interacted with it as the case. So we voted on a committee report, but not on the fiscal framework, which contains the VAT hike. So this is a procedural error that we're raising.
So based on the law, in as far as the fiscal framework is concerned, as the committee, you would have to either amend it, vote to amend it, or vote to accept it. And you're saying neither of this was what happened yesterday.
Absolutely, this was not done, and it was also unfortunate. Yesterday there was a lot of sort of unprovoked behavior occurring because those sittings were not live streamed as normally they would be by Parliament, because the Money Bills and Amendment Procedure and Other Related Matters Act is what stipulates that we must do this. It's the legislation that gives us the powers to do this, and that was the opportunity. Because if we look at the committee report, almost 97% of stakeholders say they reject the VAT hikes. So we were then empowered to take those stakeholder submissions to amend the fiscal framework, remove the VAT hikes, and put in alternatives as to where we're going to generate the 28 billion shortfall. We did not do this, and this is a misinterpretation as well from Action SA, who I heard you're going to speak to later. They may have a misunderstanding of the legislation that amends the VAT hikes which reside within the fiscal framework and revenue proposals. They have made a recommendation in the committee report that Treasury must within 30 days come back with an alternative, but nothing permits an amendment of the fiscal framework once it's been adopted. So I think part and parcel of Action SA's misreading of this legislation and misreading of this process is how the meeting itself was handled, which is where we've written to the Speaker. Okay,
so just to clarify then, according to the rules, to stop the VAT increase from taking effect on the 1st of May, a new rules amendment bill would have to be passed by Parliament before that date, right? So what happens in the vote today? Because my understanding is that in terms of the law, the finance minister must at least be given about 2 days to respond to any proposed amendment of that fiscal framework by the committee. So when you vote later today, what are you voting on if there is no when there's no response to that proposal where the finance minister says, okay, cool, we're taking away this VAT and this is how we're going to get that additional revenue?
Look, first and foremost, there hasn't been an amendment. So if you read the committee report now, which we say has been drafted and crafted and put on the ATC with procedures in place that happened yesterday, it says that we accept the fiscal framework of 2025 as proposed by the Minister of Finance. Now, the committee was not seized with this as we were sitting yesterday, so that's the procedural error that occurred. But as things stand now, the current fiscal framework and revenue proposals that are going to be voted on in Parliament contain the 0.5% VAT hikes this year and next year. The committee report is something that is completely different from the fiscal framework that is going to be voted on. And the recommendations are not legally binding on amendments to the fiscal framework. There's no legislation that permits that 30 days later we can come back and amend the fiscal framework. That is what we were trying to impress. So today we're going to be, as the EFF, we're still waiting for the Speaker, of course, to respond to our letter to determine our course of action. But principally, it is the EFF and the Democratic Alliance and the Mkhonto Sizwe Party which have rejected both the report and the fiscal framework as it stands, because it's not representative of submissions of stakeholders which have rejected the VAT hikes.
So what stops the Speaker of Parliament from saying, in the National Assembly later today, let's vote on whether we adopt this report that contains these recommendations by Action SA supported by the ANC and IFP, and then we move the vote on the budget to a later stage once we have the Finance Minister who's come back with a revised budget?
Look, I think there's no legislation that permits it. So the recommendations by Action SA in the committee report do not have a legislative impact on the fiscal framework. The only mechanism to amend the fiscal framework, and you rightly said that we can amend it and then the minister has 2 days to revert back, are contained in the Money Bills Amendment Act. So the recommendation that says that 30 days must be given to National Treasury to come back with an alternative is not permissible by law. Like, there's no provision on it in any legislation. So the Speaker would have to rationalize to us on what basis is she doing that. And that's what we were asking the Action SA member yesterday in Parliament. Okay, we hear your proposal. It might be progressive at face value, but legislatively, what permits this to be doable? So the proposal, if the Speaker were to come with a proposal of that nature, she'd have to rationalize it in law, and there's nothing that rationalizes that as we stand here today. So that is the challenge with Action SA's proposal, and it's well-meaning, but it's not consequential in our view.
Okay, Sina Otambo, EFF